A bitterly cold wind is blowing through the Kremlin these days, and it's not because winter is approaching. Vladimir Putin's entire strategic calculations, built on the premise that the West is tired and Ukraine is about to fall, have been shattered in recent days by news coming from Berlin, London, and Paris. That dreaded scenario, long considered a red line that Russia tried to prevent with nuclear blackmail, is no longer a possibility, but the strongest option on the table. European troops are preparing to set foot on Ukrainian soil. Yes, you heard right. The EU has now brought the issue of sending a peacekeeping force to Ukraine back to the agenda with a joint move. This is seen not just as a message of support, but as a boots-on-the-ground operation that will change the continent's destiny. Led by Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Berlin has cast aside its reticence and entered into a race with Paris and London to send a peacekeeping force to Ukraine. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed in his meeting with Zelensky that British soldiers are ready to set foot in Ukraine as soon as the fighting stops. This three-pronged spearhead, which includes France, is preparing to destroy Putin's "time is on our side" doctrine. Russia now faces not a Ukrainian army running out of ammunition, but a massive resistance bloc backed by Europe's industrial and military might, with Russia's seized funds in its coffers and Europe's elite troops at its borders. Faced with such steps by the EU, Putin had hoped to turn Trump's peace plan into a surrender agreement. But he found himself facing a united European bloc, armed to the teeth, equipped with Taurus missiles, and sworn to defend Ukraine with its own soldiers. What Moscow planned as a victory march may now be turning into Russia's strategic encirclement. However, the Kremlin wing does not seem to have realized the gravity of the situation. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stated that the West wants to rewrite Trump's plan and sabotage peace efforts. Lavrov also claimed in a statement that although Western media outlets are more numerous, people trust RT and Sputnik more. It seems that the Russian regime does not accept the military power emerging from Europe, which appears to be bearing down on Putin in Ukraine. But now, how Europe's coalition of the willing has turned Putin's dreams into a nightmare, and how the European army entering Ukraine will redraw the map, will be laid bare on your screens. If you're ready, let's begin. At the heart of events is that critical peace draft, secretly prepared between Washington and Moscow, but completely mutated by Europe's intervention. Initially, there was a 28-point text that whetted Vladimir Putin's appetite, keeping Ukraine out of NATO and downsizing its army. Putin saw this text as Ukraine's de facto surrender. However, the diplomatic battle behind closed doors in Geneva and Abu Dhabi turned this text into an impossible pill for Russia to swallow. What European intelligence sources described as a 28-point surrender plan has now evolved into a revised 19-point security framework that strengthens Ukraine's hand. This is where the coalition of volunteers stepped in. French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer put a very critical truth on the table. Guarantees on paper won't stop Putin, only steel and gunpowder will stop him. This was a very tough move by the EU, and the most significant step taken towards sending a peacekeeping force to Ukraine. So, what will this European army do in Ukraine? The plan involves a much more sophisticated and strategic checkmate than the headlines suggesting they are going to war. There are no plans for French and British soldiers to clash head-on with Russians on the front line, at least not for now. The main objective of the EU peacekeeping force is to secure Ukraine's rear. These forces could be deployed to strategic centers such as Kiev and Odessa, and especially to the Belarusian border. The ingenious aspect of this move is as follows. Currently, tens of thousands of elite Ukrainian soldiers are idle in the north, waiting for a possible attack from the Belarusian border. If the European peace force settles in these regions as the Northern Shield, Ukraine's best-trained brigades will be freed up and can be shifted entirely to the Eastern Front, to Donbass. This could be a critical move that could shift the balance of power on the front in Ukraine's favor overnight. On the other hand, the mission defined by French President Emmanuel Macron as the Air Assurance Force aims to protect Ukraine's airspace. This means creating a de facto no-fly zone in Ukrainian skies. Russian missiles will now face not only Ukraine's air defense, but also Europe's most advanced systems. The biggest surprise here came from Germany. The Berlin administration, which has been paralyzed by escalation anxiety for years, has taken on a completely different identity with Chancellor Friedrich Merz. 56% of the German public, more than half of the population, approves of sending German troops to Ukraine in the event of a peace agreement. This proves that German society has awakened from its pacifist slumber and now feels the Russian threat at its doorstep. While German generals put Operation Plan Germany on the table, which envisions the transfer of 800,000 soldiers in 2024 to strengthen NATO's eastern flank, Berlin was a concerned observer. But now the Germans are stepping into the role of playmaker. Even Russian President Vladimir Putin probably could not have predicted that the EU would unite so strongly and collectively stand with Ukraine. Putin's plan was simple before the EU's joint moves. The Russian leader wanted to isolate Ukraine, divide NATO, and disarm Kiev. But what he found was a Europe that was united, deploying its troops and effectively turning Ukraine into a NATO stronghold. In other words, the Kremlin's demand for security guarantees collided with Europe's security wall. If European soldiers are the shield in this affair, then the new arms packages Germany is preparing to send to Ukraine are the spear. The debate over whether to deliver the Taurus missiles, which has been going on for months, even years, has ended with the Merz government's firm stance. Germany is not only sending peacekeepers, it is putting a dagger in Russia's heart into Ukraine's hands. We are talking about Taurus cruise missiles. If these missiles fall into Ukraine's hands, things may not go as Putin planned for Moscow. The reason is quite simple. The range and destructive power of these missiles say it all. These monsters, with a range of 500 kilometers, have the capacity to strike not only the front line, but also Russia's logistical backbone, command centers, and yes, theoretically, even the outskirts of Moscow. The Taurus's greatest feature is its ability to destroy underground shelters and reinforced concrete structures, such as the Kerch Bridge. Putin's logistical link with Crimea could become tenuous with the deployment of these missiles. It's not just German-made Taurus missiles. Ukraine is also deploying its own domestically produced Flamingo missiles, which are claimed to have a range of 3,000 kilometers. Germany's financial support for this domestic production is freeing Ukraine from external dependence and turning it into a blacksmith forging its own longsword. Now imagine the Taurus and Flamingo missiles being used simultaneously. In such a scenario, Ukraine would have the power to launch a dual missile strike. If both missiles are used in a potential attack, no part of Russia would be safe. Headlines in such a joint attack operation would likely come from Crimea and Russia's most strategic cities. Of course, Ukraine's ability to finance such attacks and use these Western missiles is also an important issue. The EU is also trying to fulfill its responsibilities in this regard. To finance this military buildup, the European Union has opened its wallet wide. Germany has allocated an additional 3 billion euros for Ukraine in its 2026 budget. This money means more artillery ammunition, more drones, and the renewal of Patriot air defense systems. Furthermore, plans to transfer the interest from frozen Russian assets, amounting to approximately $300 billion, to Ukraine are being accelerated. Consider this. Putin's own money is financing the missiles that are striking the Russian army. For the Kremlin, this is not only a military defeat, but also a humiliating economic collapse scenario. When we combine all these moves, the picture that emerges is a complete strategic stalemate for Vladimir Putin. The Russian president aimed to push NATO away from his borders while invading Ukraine. At this point, however, as a result of Putin's own actions, NATO members have even begun planning to settle inside Ukraine, right under Russia's nose. So what is the current state of the Russian army, and how likely is Putin's military power to prevail against NATO's peacekeeping force? Russia's military resources are running out. Intelligence reports show that Russia is losing a division of soldiers every month, and despite completely indexing its economy to the war, it cannot sustain this war of attrition against the combined power of Europe. Putin thought Europe was bluffing. However, Europe showed that it was not bluffing by freezing 210 billion euros in Russian assets and sending troops, but rather changing the rules of the game. Russia is now diplomatically isolated, economically hit with its own money, and militarily surrounded by an army equipped to NATO standards. We are talking about a Ukrainian army that will be modernized and supported by the EU. Even the Kremlin's nuclear threat card no longer creates panic in Western capitals as it once did. On the contrary, it increases their resolve. So what is happening across the ocean? Europe's unexpected and aggressive move is also changing the equation in Washington. Trump, above all, loves power and hates to appear weak. Europe's strong stance behind Ukraine is preventing Trump from making concessions to Putin. Moreover, American streets are also stirring. From Los Angeles to New York, from Boston to Washington, tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets against the peace plan that imposes Russia's terms. Crowds gathering under Stand with Ukraine banners and criticism from Trump's own party about favoring Putin are forcing the White House to take a tougher stance in favor of Ukraine. Trump's representative Marco Rubio's participation in the Coalition of Volunteers meeting and his description of the talks as very positive is seen as the strongest evidence that the U.S. has given the green light to this new European security architecture. Over time, Trump will prefer to say that he brought Putin to heel together with Europe. The Trump administration's stance will likely evolve more intensely in this direction over time. If the US and the EU unite, Russia's task could become much more difficult. Putin could shift his focus to the Pacific as a result of this union. As for Russia's allies, North Korea is trying to prove its loyalty to Putin by sending troops and ammunition. But this support is a drop in the ocean compared to Europe's industrial capacity. What about China? Beijing is watching the situation with great concern. 59% of the German public now views China as a major economic threat. Europe's hardening stance against Russia also sends a message to China. Our trade partnership will end if you threaten our security. Fearing the loss of the European market, China is reluctant to provide open military support to Russia. Putin receives only cautious silence from Beijing, from whom he expected unlimited friendship. Beijing is now Moscow's economic lifeline, diplomatic shield, and technology supplier. In return, Russia provides cheap energy, discounted raw materials, and geopolitical obedience. This shift has created a reversal in the Cold War hierarchy. A weakened Russia is in the orbit of a confident and globally rising China. Russian leaders have boasted for decades about maintaining their independence from Beijing, yet the two countries have grown closer thanks to their mutual contempt for U.S. power. This balance began to unravel after Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea, as Western sanctions pushed Moscow to seek investment and energy deals from China. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 deepened the rift. Cut off from Western markets and banking systems, the Kremlin turned almost entirely to China for survival. The result was an unbalanced trade relationship. China now accounts for more than a third of Russia's total exports, mostly crude oil sold at deep discounts. The yuan has replaced the dollar in cross-border transactions, and Chinese companies have filled the void left by Western technology companies, from smartphones to automobiles and industrial machinery. However, these exchanges rarely occur on equal terms. Beijing sets the pricing and payment terms and often secures advantageous deals by exploiting Russia's isolation. Energy is the clearest example of how Russia's dependence has hardened. The Siberian pipeline, hailed by Putin as a symbol of strategic cooperation, in practice directs Russian gas to a single market with limited bargaining power. Plans for a second Siberian pipeline have stalled due to Beijing's pressure for deeper price discounts and long-term guarantees. Once a global energy superpower, Russia now sells its main exports under conditions set not in Moscow, but in Beijing. The Kremlin's pivot to Asia has made it financially dependent on Chinese banks. With Western loans frozen, Russian companies rely on yuan-denominated loans and payments through state-linked institutions in Shanghai and Shenzhen. This dependence extends to advanced technology. Despite sanctions, China supplies dual-use products such as semiconductors, unmanned aerial vehicles, and navigation components that keep Russia's defense industry running. However, Beijing's support is carefully calibrated to avoid direct conflict with Washington. Moscow may talk about unlimited cooperation, but the reality is that the boundaries appear to be clearly drawn by China's interests. Considering all these details, we understand that Russia is increasingly left to its own devices in the face of the combined power of the West. For now, the Russian army appears isolated and in a strategically difficult position, dependent on North Korea's rusty ammunition. It seems quite difficult for Putin to reverse this situation. The course of the war in Ukraine has irreversibly changed. The days when Vladimir Putin thought Europe was weak, America was indifferent, and Ukraine was helpless are long gone. Today, we are faced with a Western alliance that is not afraid to deploy its troops, that has erased its own red lines, and that is determined to checkmate Russia at its own game. Germany's Taurus tanks, British and French troops, and the anger of American streets have forged an impenetrable iron ring around Ukraine. Putin's victory plan has evaporated in the face of Europe's resolve. The question now is not how long Ukraine can hold out, but how long Russia can survive under this siege. History writes about the brave, and this winter, Europe proved its courage. If you also want to follow this strategic chess game in Ukraine, the hottest developments on the front lines, and this massive shift in the global balance of power second by second, you are in the right place. Oracle Eyes will continue to pursue the truth. Please remember to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. See you in the next video. Thank you for watching.